Hi, Katelyn, it's Kristen. Um, each week, I'm going to be recording videos just like this one to give you feedback on your creative submissions, the poetry that you submit with your writing workshop. Um, I think that's about it in terms of the details of what I need to share with you. You did your questions, you put everything into one document, so thank you so much. It was such a pleasure to be introduced to your own particular writing voice, which is very distinct and unique and a pleasure to read. So thank you for taking your time with these poems. I'm going to go ahead and scroll up to the very beginning of the document. We'll start with the where I'm from. I think that you did a really fantastic job of taking the Mary Pfeiffer quote to the Mary Pfeiffer framework of her poem and making it your own. I think that I like that you followed her format pretty strictly. I like the details that you included. I think it's also, I think it's really funny. There's a few moments of humor that I think are intentional humor. I am from Democrats, Republicans, Blink 182. That juxtaposition of politicians followed by a band, I think is pretty funny. It made me laugh out loud. Um, I want to answer your questions, and I want to say, your first question, do I need to explain how to pronounce the Odom words used in this poem? And my answer is no, absolutely not. Um, I think some of the poems that we'll be studying in this class have words of other languages in those poems, and I encourage that. I think including, especially in a poem like this one, where you're talking about your heritage, where you're talking about where you come from, I think including words from a language other than English that speaks to your heritage is completely appropriate. So you do not need to define them. In terms of should I have another line to end the poem, I would say moving forward on your next edit of this poem, why not go ahead and reread the last line of that Mary Pfeiffer poem, where she sort of spins off into a different idea. Her line is, my own sweet dance unfolding against a cast of women in aprons and barefoot men in overalls, right? She kind of spins off in this other direction to end the poem. And I would encourage you to try that. Play with it, see what you can do to end your poem and just sort of spin it off in another direction for the last line. Moving on, my writing life, the Arizona sunset. I know that your first question was about the first line, or your second question, should I leave the first line or take it out? And then am I using my punctuation correctly? Okay. So the first line, you know, I think that's your decision ultimately, but I do think that it's wise when you're editing a poem, after you've written a poem and you're editing it, to consider what can be cut, what is unnecessary. I think that's a great way to re-enter the space, to ask yourself, what is unnecessary in this poem? What words, what phrases are padding, are interrupting the flow? And then what ideas might need to be expanded? What didn't I go far enough into that I'd like to expand a little bit more on this next edit of the poem? So I think those are really good questions to ask yourself. I think if you cut this first line, my ideas look and feel like the Arizona sunset. Then what you're going to be doing is you're going to be encouraging your reader to understand the poem itself and what's going on in the poem by the details you include that describe the sunset. I personally enjoy that as a reader, and I think it's an interesting technique to play around with. But, ultimately that's your decision. When it comes to punctuation, I think, yes, your punctuation is just fine in this poem. We're not going to spend a whole lot of time talking about punctuation in this class. I'm more interested in fostering your creativity, in getting you to feel inspired enough to put your ideas down on the page than I am about whether or not you're using commas and periods correctly. I will say that in poetry, every piece of punctuation guides the reader towards a pause or a stop, right? So my ideas look and feel like the Arizona sunset, period. That creates a longer pause. A moment of enlightenment, whimsical and grounded. So notice that my pause after enlightenment, because you used a comma, was much smaller than my pause after the period, right? So every piece of punctuation that you use does guide the reader. It's sort of a clue for the reader to understand how long to pause for before moving on to the next image. So just know that moving forward. I don't think you did anything wrong or incorrect in this poem. I'm excited to see where you go from here with the next edits, and I'm excited to read your next submissions. Thanks so much.